Hey there, and welcome back to ClearPath Conversations. I'm Mark Bernardin. In the last episode, we talked about introducing CS-led upsell without feeling salesy. We covered how to identify the right moments, position value instead of pushing product, and navigate that middle lane between being a trusted advisor and driving revenue. It's one of the most uncomfortable conversations for CSMs, but it's also one of the most valuable when you do it right. Today we're shifting gears to talk about a different kind of uncomfortable transition, moving from individual contributor CSM to team lead. Now, before you skip this episode thinking, I don't want to be a manager, let me be clear. This isn't just for people gunning for a CS manager title. This is for every senior CSM who's ever been asked to mentor a new hire. Every IC who's filling in while their manager is out. Every experienced CSM who's expected to help level up the team while still managing their own book of business. Because here's the reality. Every senior CSM should know how to mentor and develop people. Not because you want to be a manager, but because that's what senior means. You don't get to senior level just by being good at your accounts. You get there by making everyone around you better. So whether you're stepping into formal team leadership or just being asked to mentor junior CSMs, this episode is about what actually changes when you're responsible for developing people, and what stays the same, and how to do it without burning out or losing sight of what you're actually good at. Let me start with a story. At Palo Alto Networks, my manager went on an extended leave. Now, we're talking months. And I was asked to step up and mentor 7 CSMs while continuing to manage my own portfolio of enterprise accounts. I wasn't given a new title. I wasn't given a raise, but I was given something more valuable. The opportunity to prove I could develop talent at scale while still delivering on my own book of business. And I said yes, not because I wanted to become a manager, but because I saw an opportunity to build something that would outlast the temporary assignment. Most people in that situation would just keep the seat warm, answer questions when asked, put out fires, hand everything back when the manager returned. I didn't do that. I built a system. I created a mentoring framework. I documented everything that I was teaching so the next person wouldn't have to start from scratch. And I treated those 7 CSMs like a portfolio, not a distraction from my other work. But here's what I didn't fully understand at the time. Mentoring 7 CSMs is not the same as managing 7 customers. With customers, you control the relationship. You set the cadence. You define success with them. You own the outcomes. With people, you're influencing. You're not controlling. You're coaching, not directing. And success isn't measured by what you do. It's measured by what they do. And that's a completely different skill set. In those first few weeks, it seems like I made every mistake you can make as a new team lead. I over-indexed on being helpful, which meant I was doing work for people instead of teaching them how to do it themselves. I tried to stay on top of my own accounts while also reviewing everyone else's, which meant I was working 12-hour days and still falling behind. And I assumed that because I was good at being a CSM, I'd automatically be good at developing CSMs. And I wasn't, not at first, but I learned. And I'm going to share what I learned with you today, because if you're stepping into a team lead role, formal or informal, you need to know what you're walking into. So let's start with the most important question. What actually changes when you move from CSM to team lead? But first, let me address something directly. You might be listening to this thinking, I don't want to be a manager. Why do I need to know this? Here's why. Because every senior CSM is expected to develop people, whether it's formal or not. You're expected to onboard new hires. You're expected to mentor junior team members. You're expected to share what you know and make the team better. And if you can't do that, you're not senior. You're just experienced. And there's a difference. Senior means that you can do the work at a high level and you can teach others to do it too. Senior means you're not just managing accounts, you're building capacity. Senior means when leadership looks at you, they see someone who makes the whole team more effective, not just someone who has a good book of business. So whether you want to be a CS manager someday or you want to stay in a senior IC role for the rest of your career, you need to know how to develop people. Because the companies that pay well, the companies with strong CS programs, the companies where senior CSMs actually get equity and a seat at the table, those are the companies that expect their senior people to lead, even without the manager title. Now let's talk about what actually changes when you take on that responsibility. The first thing that changes is your definition of success. As a CSM, success is personal. It's your accounts, your renewals, your expansion numbers, your customer satisfaction scores. You own it. You execute it. You get credit for it. As a team lead, success is collective. It's not about what you did. It's about what your team did. And that's a hard mental shift for a lot of high-performing CSMs because we're wired to own outcomes. But here's the truth. If you're spending all your time doing the work instead of enabling your team to do the work, you're not leading. You're just a really busy individual contributor with extra responsibilities. I learned this the hard way at Palo Alto. In my first month of mentoring those 7 CSMs, I was still trying to be the hero. Someone would bring me a problem and I'd solve it. Someone would ask for help on a customer call and I'd take over the call. Someone would struggle with an EBR deck and I'd rebuild it for them. And you know what happened? They didn't get better. They just learned to depend on me. That's not leadership. That's codependency. Real leadership is teaching someone how to solve the problem for themselves. It's sitting on the call and debriefing afterwards. It's reviewing the EBR deck and asking the questions that help them improve it, not just fixing it for them. It's slower, it's harder, and it requires a level of patience that most CSMs don't naturally have, because we're used to moving fast and just getting things done. But if you want to be a good team lead, you have to learn to let go of the work and invest in people. The second thing that changes is your calendar. As a CSM, your calendar is pretty much all customer facing, mostly customer facing. Onboarding calls, QBRs, check-ins, escalations, internal syncs with sales or support. That's the work. As a team lead, your calendar becomes people-facing. One-on-ones, coaching sessions, performance reviews, internal escalations that your team can't handle alone, cross-functional alignment meetings where you're representing your team's capacity and their priorities. And here's the thing. Those meetings, they don't feel productive. They don't feel like real work because you're not closing deals or saving accounts. You're talking about processes or team dynamics or workload balance, professional development. But that is the work now. And if you try to skip it because it doesn't feel urgent, your team is going to struggle. I remember one of the CSMs I was mentoring came to me frustrated because she was overwhelmed. She had too many accounts. She was behind on her follow-ups and she didn't know how to prioritize. And my first instinct was to just give her advice and move on. But that wouldn't have fixed anything. So instead, I blocked off an hour on my calendar. We walked through her portfolio together. We built a prioritization framework. We identified which accounts needed immediate attention and which we could move to a little lighter cadence. And then we set up a recurring check-in so that I could help her kind of stay on track. That 1 hour saved her probably 10 hours of just spinning. And it taught her a skill that she could use for the rest of her career. That's what team leadership looks like. It's not glamorous, but it's essential. The third thing that changes is how you're evaluated. As a CSM, you're evaluated on your book of business, retention, expansion, customer satisfaction. Those are your numbers. As a team lead, you're evaluated on your team's numbers. And more importantly, you're evaluated on your team's development. Are your people getting better? Are they hitting their goals? Are they staying engaged? Are they prepared for the next level? If the answer is no, that's on you. Not them. You. And that's a scary realization because it means you're now accountable for outcomes that you don't directly control. At Palo Alto, one of the CSMs that I mentored was struggling with executive conversations. She was great with day-to-day stakeholders, but she'd kind of freeze up in EBRs. And I knew that if she didn't get more confident in those moments, it was career limiting. So I started role-playing with her. We'd practice her EBR intros. We'd run through objection handling. We'd debrief after every executive call and talk about what went well and what could improve. It took months, but by the end of my time leading that team, she was running EBRs confidently. And she told me later that those coaching sessions changed her career trajectory. That's what team leadership is about. You're not just managing today's performance. You're building tomorrow's leaders. Now let's talk about what doesn't change. The first thing that doesn't change is the fundamentals of customer success. You still need to understand the customer journey. You still need to know how to identify risk. You still need to be able to run a good QBR or write a clear escalation. Because if you don't know how to do the work yourself, you can't teach someone else how to do it. I've seen team leads who were promoted too quickly before they'd really mastered the CSM role. And they struggle because their team asks questions that they can't answer. They give advice that doesn't actually work, and they lose credibility quickly. So if you're moving into a team lead role, make sure you've done the work first. Make sure you've closed red accounts. Make sure you've run successful EBRs. Make sure you've navigated through difficult escalations. Because your team is going to need you to have the answers. And I don't know is okay sometimes. But if you don't know too often, you're not ready to lead. The second thing that doesn't change is the pressure. As a CSM, you have pressure. Customer pressure, renewal pressure, internal pressure from sales, from product. As a team lead, you have all of that, plus people pressure, because now you're responsible for your team's workload, their morale, their development, and their performance. And here's what no one tells you. You can't protect your team from everything. You can't shield them from every hard conversation or every difficult account. Part of your job is helping them learn how to handle pressure themselves. But you can create clarity. You can set priorities. You can advocate for reasonable workload balance. And you can make sure they know that you've got their back. At Palo, one of the CSMs on my team was assigned a customer that was already red. And they were terrified. They didn't think they could handle it. And honestly, I wasn't too sure either. But instead of taking the account away from them, I coached them through it. We built a get well plan together. We practiced the first customer call. I sat in on that customer call with them, mostly silent, but I was there if they needed me. And they handled it. It wasn't perfect, but they handled it well enough. And more importantly, they learned that they could handle the hard things. That's the kind of pressure you want to put on your team. Not crushing pressure, but growth pressure. The kind that builds confidence instead of breaking it. The third thing that doesn't change is your responsibility to execute. Now, here's a trap I see a lot of new teams fall into. They think that once they're in a leadership role, they don't have to do the work anymore. Wrong. As a team lead, you still have to model excellence. You still have to show up prepared. You still have to execute your own responsibilities with the same rigor that you expect from your team. Because your team is watching you. And if you're cutting corners or phoning it in, they'll do the same. When I was mentoring those 7 CSMs, I was still managing my own portfolio. And I made sure that my accounts were still green, that my EBRs were still tight, that my follow-ups were still timely. Because I needed my team to see that it was possible to do both, that you could lead and still execute. That leadership, it wasn't an excuse to let your standards slip. That's the example that you have to set. Not perfection, but consistency, discipline, follow through. Now, let's talk about the biggest challenge of this transition. Learning to lead without burning out. Because here's the reality. When you move from CSM to team lead, your workload doesn't go down. It goes up. You're still managing customers, but now you're also managing people. You're in more meetings. You're handling more escalations. You're responsible for more outcomes. And if you're not careful, you'll work yourself into the ground. So here's what you need to do. First, you need to get ruthless about prioritization. You cannot do everything. And you need to accept that. When I was leading that team, I had to make hard choices every single day. Which customer calls could I skip? Which internal meetings could I delegate? Which coaching conversations were urgent and which could wait until next week? I created a simple framework. If it's urgent and important, I do it now. If it's important but not urgent, I schedule it. If it's urgent but not important, I delegate it. If it's neither urgent nor important, I don't do it. That framework saved me, but it forced me to be honest about what actually mattered and what was just noise. Second, you need to protect your team's time as much as your own. One of the most important things I did as a team lead was to say no on behalf of my team. When sales wanted to pull a CSM into a last-minute demo, I'd push back. When product wanted some feedback on a new feature during the busiest week of the quarter, I'd negotiate for a better timeline. Your team is going to have a hard time saying no, especially if they're junior. So you need to say no for them. Not because you're being difficult, but because you're protecting their capacity. Third, you need to build systems that scale. As a CSM, you can get away with working from your inbox and your memory. As a team lead, you really can't. You need documentation. You need templates. You need processes that your team can follow without you. When I was mentoring, I created a shared folder with every template I'd ever built. EBR decks, risk escalation frameworks, account success plans, onboarding checklists, call recap templates. And I told my team, use these, adapt them if you need to, but don't reinvent the wheel every time. That one move probably saved my team 50 hours that quarter. And it gave them confidence because they didn't have to guess how to do things. They had a starting point. Fourth, you need to accept that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to give bad advice sometimes. You're going to misjudge a situation. You're going to promote the wrong priority or miss a red flag. That's okay. Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about learning fast and correcting course. When I made a mistake with one of my CSMs, I owned it. I told her, hey, I gave you bad advice. Here's what I should have said. Let's figure out how to fix it. That honesty built trust because she knew I wasn't pretending to have all the answers. I was just trying to help her find them. And finally, you need to remember why you're doing this. Team leadership is hard, often thankless. You're going to have weeks where you feel like you're failing at everything. But here's the truth. When you help someone get better at their job, you're changing their career. You're giving them skills that they'll use for the next 10 years. You're building their confidence in ways that ripple far beyond your team. That's the work. And it matters. So let me give you some practical advice if you're taking on mentoring or team development responsibilities, whether that's formal leadership or just what's expected at your level. First, schedule recurring one-on-ones with the people that you're mentoring. Weekly if they're brand new, bi-weekly if they're more experienced. And use that time to coach, not just to status update. Ask them, what's the hardest thing that you're working on right now? What do you need from me? What's one thing you want to get better at this quarter? Those questions create space for real development. Second, create a simple coaching framework. Here's the one that I use. Situation. What's the challenge? Options. What are the possible approaches? Recommendation. What do you think we should do? Next steps. What are you going to do next and when? That framework forces people to think for themselves instead of just asking you for the answer. Third, document everything that you're teaching. Don't make people rely on your memory or your availability. Every time you coach someone through a problem, write down what you taught them. Every time you create a process, document it. Every time you answer a question, turn it into a resource. That documentation becomes your team's playbook, and it proves your impact when it's time to talk about promotions or compensation. Fourth, set boundaries around your mentoring time. You still have your own accounts to manage. You cannot be available 24/7. Block specific times for mentoring conversations. Make it clear when you're available and when you're not. And teach people to solve problems on their own before they come to you. Good mentoring creates independence, not dependency. And finally, remember that developing people is part of what makes you valuable. It's not extra work on top of your real job. It's part of what your real job is at the senior level. The CSMs who get promoted, who get equity, who get pulled into the strategic conversations, they're not just good at their accounts. They're the ones who make everyone around them better. That's the difference between being a high-performing IC and being a senior leader, even without the manager title. Here's what I learned from my time mentoring those 7 CSMs at Palo Alto. Leadership is not about being the best CSM in the room. It's about making everyone else in the room better CSMs. It's not about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions. It's not about working harder. It's about working smarter and teaching others to do the same. And it's not about control. It's about trust. When I stepped into that role, I thought leadership was about proving that I could handle everything. But it wasn't. It was about proving my team could handle everything, with or without me. And when my manager came back from leave, I handed back the team lead responsibilities and returned to my portfolio. Not because I couldn't do the job, but because I discovered something important about myself. I'm better at building programs than running them full time. I loved developing the CSMs. I loved creating the frameworks and documentation that made them more effective. I loved seeing them grow. But I didn't love being the back-to-back one-on-ones all day instead of working with customers. I didn't love performance reviews and capacity planning. I didn't love the administrative weight of formal people management. What I loved was the mentoring itself, the teaching, the system building, the impact. And here's what I realized. You don't have to be a manager to do that work. You can be a senior CSM who develops talent, builds programs, and elevates the team without giving up the customer work that makes you effective. That's the model I've followed ever since. At every company I've worked, I've taken on mentoring responsibilities. I've built onboarding programs. I've created enablement content. I've coached junior CSMs and helped them get promoted. But I've done it as a senior IC who knows how to scale impact, not as a manager who's trying to climb a ladder that I don't actually want to be on. Because the best senior CSMs aren't just good at their own accounts. They're the people who make everyone else better. They're the ones who build the playbooks, who mentor the next generation and create the systems that last long after they're gone. That's what senior means. And that's That's what this episode is really about. Now, if you're preparing for this transition and you want a head start, I've got a resource for you. It's called the Team Lead Readiness Toolkit, and it's available at clearpathcx.com. It includes a coaching conversation framework and a one-on-one meeting template, a team development tracker, and a leadership self-assessment. It's designed to help you step into leadership with clarity instead of just winging it. So check that out if you want to be prepared. In the next episode, we're going to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in customer success: internal advocacy. How to get credit for your work without bragging. How to manage up effectively. How to document your impact so that when promotion time comes, you're not scrambling to prove your value. Because the reality is, great work doesn't speak for itself. You have to speak for it. And most CSMs, they're terrible at that. So we're going to fix that next time. Until then, here's what I'd love you to think about. If you're already mentoring people, formally or informally, ask yourself, am I developing them, or am I just solving problems for them? Am I creating independence, or am I creating dependence? Am I building skills that will last, or am I just putting out today's fires? And if you're not mentoring anyone yet, but you're at a senior level or you're heading there, ask yourself, am I ready to develop others? Have I mastered the fundamentals well enough to teach them? Have I documented my approach so that I can share it? Have I proven that I can make other people better, not just execute well myself? Because that's what separates good CSMs from great ones. That's what separates senior ICs who get promoted and compensated like leaders from experienced ICs who just have tenure. You don't need a manager title to have impact, but you do need to know how to build others up. So follow the show on your favorite platform. Visit clearpathcx.com to grab that Team Lead Readiness Toolkit and other resources, and connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Mark Bernardin. If this episode helped you think differently about leadership, drop me a message. I read every one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this work. And thank you for showing up and delivering every single day. I'll talk to you soon.